The first insult came over a wideband diplomatic channel, clear and deliberate, broadcast to representatives of the interstellar concord and, unintentionally or not, to every major planetary system in the sector. "You call that a civilization?" said Commander Veksh, angular face illuminated by the soft violet glow of the bridge on board the Xolaran dreadnought Heshtel. "Your planet is a backwater biological accident that somehow scraped together enough metal to launch garbage into orbit. You've contributed nothing to the Concord except inconvenient noise." The silence that followed was not diplomatic. It was stunned. Zane Asher sat in the back row of the Earth delegation, his suit uncomfortably stiff at the collar, his left wrist still sore from the training exercise earlier that week. He was not a diplomat. He wasn't even supposed to be here. Earth's lead ambassador had suffered a surprise appendicitis 2 hours before departure, and Zane, as the closest qualified officer within range aboard the UNS Tereshkova, had been ordered to step in. His file said he was competent in cross-species protocol, fluent in 5 Concord dialects, and had once defused a standoff between 2 Ziggurat warlords by sharing a bottle of 1982 bourbon, which, for the record, he had been saving. But this wasn't a standoff. This was a humiliation. The chamber's lights dimmed slightly as the broadcast ended. The Xolaran delegation, flanked by their obsidian-armored guards, stood impassive across the hall. Earth's delegation sat still. Even the Andari, usually quick to offer some soothing platitude, remained silent. Zane stood. He didn't ask permission. He didn't glance at the others. He walked forward until he stood at the central platform under the translucent dome of the Concord Assembly's main hall. 100 planets watched. "Commander Veksh," he said, voice steady, "I'm sorry your sensors have such a narrow range. Earth isn't garbage. We're just new." Veksh tilted his head slightly. "Newness is not an excuse for mediocrity." "No," Zane said, "it's not. But it is a reason to be underestimated. And we've gotten very, very good at that." He smiled. Not smug. Not mocking. Just the kind of quiet, calm expression that didn't match the insult that had come before. Then he turned and walked back to his seat. The Concord Assembly moved on, but the incident didn't fade. Not by a long shot. 2 days later, the UNS Tereshkova was recalled to Earth orbit. Zane was summoned to the United Coalition Defense Council, and for the first time in his life, he stood in front of Earth's most senior officers and politicians wearing a clean uniform that still smelled faintly of recycled ozone. "Do you know what you've done?" asked Admiral Reeds, a hard woman with a reputation for never repeating herself. "Yes," Zane said. "Then explain it." He exhaled slowly. "Xolaran military doctrine is built on dominance through intimidation. They insulted us because they don't see us as a threat. We've been begging for a seat at the table for decades. That was our test. And I passed it. You called us underestimated. I said we're good at being underestimated." Reeds narrowed her eyes. "You smiled." "Yes." "Why?" "Because we have a fleet." The room fell silent. "Not officially," he added. "Not yet. But the modular defense initiative you've been working on in the asteroid belt? The one you've been calling a distributed research platform? It's operational." General Tunney leaned forward. "How do you know that?" "I helped design the control protocols," Zane said. "I was part of the original team at Armstrong Station. We finished our trial runs 6 weeks ago. If you activate the array, we can deploy over 70 modular combat frames within 6 hours. Fully armed. Fully shielded. No alien tech. All ours." Reeds didn't blink. "You're proposing we respond to a diplomatic insult with a military display?" "No," Zane said. "I'm proposing we show them we're not garbage." The vote passed. Narrowly. 3 days later, the Heshtel entered orbit around Ganymede, under the pretense of observing Concord mining inspections. Zane was waiting in orbit on board the UNS Huron, a lean command vessel with a crew of 72 and a paint job that still smelled like welding fumes. The Xolaran ship sent no formal communication. Zane didn't expect any. He stood on the bridge as the countdown ticked down. "Commander Asher," said Captain Norelli, "fleet deployment is ready. Awaiting your order." He nodded. "Execute." All across the Jovian belt, dark specks detached from stone and ice. Hidden in the shadows of mining rigs and research platforms, the modular frames came online. Wings unfolded. Engines flared. Weapons powered up. 73 ships in total. All human-built. All Earth-controlled. All broadcasting the same signal, not a threat, but a presence. The Heshtel didn't move. Zane opened a channel. "Commander Veksh," he said, "you called us garbage. I'd like to introduce you to our recycling program." There was a pause. Then the Xolaran ship sent a single word in return. "Noted." The display ended. The Xolaran ship departed Ganymede orbit within the hour. Zane didn't celebrate. He went back to his quarters, pulled off his jacket, and leaned against the bulkhead. His wrist still ached. His stomach growled. He was exhausted. But Earth had stood up. Not with arrogance. Not with bravado. Just with what it had. A week later, a Concorde envoy arrived in Earth orbit. The Andari ambassador, a tall, translucent being named Peleer, met Zane aboard the Huron. "I must admit," Peleer said, "we did not expect such a coordinated response." Zane shrugged. "We were ready. Just not in the way people thought. We had assumed your technological development was uneven. It is. But we work with what we have." Later, Zane watched the stars from the observation deck. He didn't feel victorious. He felt tired. But he also felt seen. Earth had answered an insult not with rage, but with resolve. And now the galaxy knew. But there were complications to come. Xolaran pride was not easily forgotten. 2 weeks later, while supervising a fleet readiness drill near Mars orbit, the UNS Huron was ambushed. 3 Xolaran fighters dropped out of FTL without warning, weapons hot. "Shields up," shouted Norelli. "Return fire authorization?" Zane didn't hesitate. Defensive pattern Delta. No lethal shots. The fighters were faster, more agile. The Huron took a hit to the port side power conduit rupture. Zane was thrown against the wall. He heard something crack in his shoulder. "Medical," barked Norelli. "I'm good," Zane grunted, trying to stand. Pain lanced down his arm. He wasn't good. The med team ran a scan. Fractured clavicle, possible torn ligaments. "You're grounded until recovery," the medic said. 6 to 8 weeks. Zane didn't argue. He knew the drill. He was transferred to Armstrong Station for treatment. While Earth filed formal protests, the Xolaran government denied involvement. Rogue elements, they claimed. Unstable actors. But Zane knew better. The insult had been answered, but not forgotten. As his shoulder healed, he spent his days reviewing sensor logs, refining the modular fleet's coordination protocols, and writing a report that no one would admit existed. Norelli visited on day 15. "They're watching," she said. "Every fleet in the Concorde is recalibrating their risk assessments." Zane nodded. "Let them. Do we escalate?" "No. We wait." And they did. 3 months later, Zane returned to duty. His shoulder still ached in cold air, but the mobility was back. The UNS Huron was now part of a permanent Earth defense fleet, stationed at Lagrange 3. Then came the invitation. Commander Veksh requested a private meeting. Neutral ground. Concorde Station 12. The council debated. Zane volunteered. He arrived unarmed, accompanied only by a diplomatic attaché. Veksh was already there, seated in a low-gravity chamber. "You recovered," Veksh said without preamble. "Mostly. You defied expectations. That's what we do." Veksh studied him. "You smiled. When I insulted your planet." "Yes." "Why?" Zane met his gaze. "Because I knew we had something worth defending. And now you do too." Veksh didn't reply immediately. Then, slowly, he extended his hand. "We will not underestimate you again." Zane took it. "Good," he said. That was the point. The meeting was brief. No new treaties signed. But no threats issued either. Back on Earth, Zane walked along the coast near Cape Jefferson, the wind tugging at his jacket. A child flew a kite nearby, laughing as it dipped and soared. A fleet hovered in orbit above, silent and ready. Not a threat, just a presence. And for the first time in Earth's turbulent relationship with the stars, that was enough. The Andari shuttle docked with a soft magnetic snap, and the airlock hissed open with the faint smell of ozone and salt, an odd combination but not unusual on Concorde Station 12, where atmospheric processors recycled thousands of species preferences into something vaguely agreeable. Zane Asher adjusted the sling binding his left arm and stepped into the vestibule, flanked by Pelair, the Andari envoy, whose translucent form shimmered faintly in the station's neutral lighting. Commander Veksh waited near the atrium's central pillar alone. His posture was relaxed, almost too relaxed for a Xolaran, but the tip of his tail flicked once, betraying a trace of tension. "You arrived unarmed," Veksh observed, his gaze flicking to Zane's shoulder. "You invited me," Zane said. "Didn't seem polite to bring a sidearm. Your people are known for their contradictions." "That's fair. We're still figuring out which ones we like." Pelea let out a sound that could have been amusement or indigestion. It was difficult to tell with Andari. Zane gave him a glance, then focused back on Veksh. "You requested this meeting," he said. "I'm listening." Veksh gestured toward a recessed alcove with a low table and 3 curved seats. "Sit. Or stand if that's easier." Zane sat. The sling tugged uncomfortably under his jacket, and he shifted until the pressure eased. Pelea remained standing, his eyes, if they could be called that, glowing faintly. "I reviewed your species' combat protocols," Veksh began. "Your engagement patterns during the Ganymede deployment were irregular. We improvise. That's not a strategy. It is when you've got fewer ships and shorter range weapons." Veksh tilted his head. "And yet you pushed us to reposition half our core patrols. That's not improvisation. That's leverage." Zane studied him. "What do you want, Commander?" "I want to know how. We built it ourselves. Not the fleet. The mind behind it." Zane blinked. "You think I planned the entire operation? You anticipated our cultural pressure tactic. You repelled a reconnaissance ambush with non-lethal force. You arranged a fleet mobilization without global panic. And you smiled. I still don't understand why that's the part that bothers everyone." "Because humans smile for too many reasons," Veksh said. "Aggression, submission, deception, humor, pain. It confuses us. That seems more like your problem." "Exactly." Pelea's glow pulsed once, then dimmed. "I would like to observe your people," Veksh said suddenly. Zane raised an eyebrow. "What?" "Not your military. Your civilians. I want to see what kind of species survives by contradiction and chaos." Zane leaned back painfully. "You think we thrive on chaos? I think you haven't collapsed yet, which is statistically improbable. We have good coffee," Zane offered, "and an unhealthy tolerance for nonsense. I want to see it." "You're asking to visit Earth?" "I am." Zane looked at Pelair. The Andari made no objection. "Fine," Zane said. "But no armored escorts, no scans, and you stay away from our financial markets." "Agreed." 3 days later, Zane stood on the observation deck of a maglev train slicing through the Rockies, with Veksh seated across from him, wrapped modestly in a slate-gray travel robe. The Xolaran had drawn attention at the Denver terminal mostly from children, but had responded with polite nods and one awkward attempt to mimic a high five. "You have mountains," Veksh noted. "They've been here longer than we have. They are inefficient for transport. We didn't build them. Then why keep them?" Zane gestured out the window. "Because they remind us we're not in charge." Veksh was quiet for a moment. "Then, your people live near volcanic zones, floodplains, and tectonic fault lines. We're sentimental. That's not a survival trait. It is when you factor in stubbornness." The train slid into a tunnel. Zane blinked as the interior lights shifted. "You were injured during the ambush," Veksh said. "Hairline fracture. Ligament strain. They gave me a brace, some rehab, a list of things not to do. And you ignored it. Mostly. Why?" "Because I wanted to be here when you asked the next question." Veksh tapped one clawed finger against the window. "What is your species fear?" Zane didn't answer right away. "Extinction," he said finally. "But not in the way you think. We don't fear being wiped out by war or disease. We fear becoming irrelevant. Forgotten. Replaced. That is not unique. No. But we write songs about it. We make movies where we're the last survivors in a ruined world and we always find a dog. Veksh nodded slowly. And the dog survives? Almost always. The train emerged from the tunnel, revealing a sweep of forested valley below. Veksh stared at it a long time. I studied your war records, he said. You lost more soldiers to exposure in the Eurasian conflicts than to enemy fire. We weren't prepared. Then you adapted. We usually do. I don't understand that. You suffer, then change. Why not change before the suffering begins? Because we never believe it'll be that bad until it is. That is irrational. Exactly. Later that evening, they arrived at a small coastal research facility in Oregon. Zane led Veksh past rows of tide pool tanks and solar collectors, into a narrow lab where a marine biologist in waders was cataloging mollusk behavior. This is Dr. Riva Tell, Zane said. She's studying how pollution affects neural patterning in cephalopods. Veksh peered into a tank. These creatures change shape, and color, and behavior. They lack a centralized skeleton. Some of them can solve mazes faster than a human 4-year-old. Veksh blinked. You respect these things? We envy them. Riva looked up. They're problem solvers. No hierarchy. No politics. Just curiosity and pattern recognition. Also, they taste fantastic, Zane added. Veksh ignored him. You study creatures you also consume. We're complicated. You revere what you exploit. That's one way to put it. Veksh turned to Riva. If given the choice, would your species become more like these creatures? She tilted her head. Only if we got to keep the sandwiches. Veksh didn't respond. He stared at the octopus in the tank, which had compressed itself into a narrow crevice and was now watching him with one bulbous eye. The next morning, Zane found Veksh standing alone on a rocky outcrop above the surf. The wind had picked up and salt mist clung to every surface. There's a term your people use, Veksh said. Resilience. It's popular. I've seen it misapplied. You use it to describe recovery from preventable disasters. That's part of it. You wear your wounds like credentials. Some of us. Veksh turned toward him. I expected arrogance. Instead I find defiance. We've had practice. I wonder what your species would become without constant pressure. Lazy, Zane said, but very creative. That I believe. They stood in silence for a while, watching a pair of seabirds dive into the waves. I still don't understand why you smiled, Veksh said. Zane thought about it. Because I knew something you didn't, he said. That we'd already decided not to lose. Veksh nodded once. I will submit my revised report to the Concord. Good. Include the part about the sandwiches. I will omit that. As they returned to the shuttle, Zane's shoulder twinged again. The brace would be off in another week, assuming he didn't overdo it. Again. The Xolaran didn't ask for a formal farewell, and Zane didn't offer one. They parted with a nod at the edge of the launch pad, the sky streaked with early evening light. Back in the lab, Riva was feeding the octopus a shrimp. It ignored her, then took the food anyway. Zane watched for a moment. Do you think they understand us? He asked. Riva didn't look up. Probably. They just don't care. He grinned and walked out, the sound of the surf rising behind him. Above, the stars were beginning to emerge. Silent. Watching. And slowly, one by one, no longer dismissing Earth as background noise. 3 weeks after Veksh's visit to Earth, Zane Asher was sitting in a sterile rehabilitation ward in Geneva, watching a young technician strap electrodes to his shoulder. A wall-mounted screen displayed a looping animation of a human rotator cuff, and because someone in the health sector had a sense of humor, a small animated alien clumsily attempting a push-up. Try to relax, the technician said, tightening the last strap. This is going to feel like all your muscles are arguing with each other. They usually are, Zane muttered, flexing his fingers as the current began its slow climb. I've just learned to referee. The pulse hit his upper deltoid like a sudden cramp and then settled into a dull, rhythmic contraction. He exhaled through his nose, eyes fixed on the ceiling's acoustic panels. You're the guy from the Concord standoff, right? The technician asked, adjusting a dial without waiting for a reply. Zane didn't look at him. That's what the paperwork says. Guess it's weird being famous for not firing a shot. Fame is overrated. So is paperwork. The technician chuckled, then tapped a tablet and moved to the next patient. Zane shifted in the chair, careful not to jolt the implants. His shoulder had regained most of its mobility, but the nerves around the clavicle were still finicky, a side effect of repeated magnetic exposure from the Fleet Command interface. Human bodies weren't designed to plug into anything, and the adaptation process tended to leave lingering bruises. Not visible ones, but the kind that made cold showers feel like punishment. The door slid open with a low chime. Zane turned his head, wincing slightly. A tall figure entered, lime green skin, vertical pupils, and a torso that shifted subtly with each breath like a slow accordion. "You're early," Zane said. "I'm punctual," said the visitor. "You're behind schedule." Zane lifted an eyebrow. Didn't expect a Dravani liaison to walk into physical therapy. "You left your comms active on an unsecured channel. That's either a cry for help or a test. Or maybe I just forgot to turn it off." The Dravani stepped closer, glancing at the electrode array. "Your nervous system is adapting too slowly. The Xolaran weapon that struck your vessel emitted a frequency designed to destabilize command relay functions." Zane narrowed his eyes. "That wasn't in the report." "It wasn't in the report because you didn't write one. I filed an incident log. A paragraph is not a log." Zane grunted as the current surged again. "I didn't think we were still collecting data on that skirmish." "We are. Because the Xolarans continue to deny it happened. They're not good at apologies. They're worse at lying. And that's why I'm here." Zane leaned back, letting the electrodes do their work. "You want me to testify?" The Dravani's pupils contracted. "Not in a courtroom. In orbit." He didn't answer immediately. The pulses had begun to hit deeper tissue, the kind that made his breath hitch every few seconds. It wasn't pain exactly, but something close. "I'm not interested in a show of force," he said. "It's not a show. It's an inspection. Concord protocol. Neutral observers. Strategic transparency. I'm still recovering. You're mobile. You're lucid. And you're the only human the Xolarans will respond to without posturing." Zane glanced at the ceiling again. "So I'm a translator now. You're a precedent." 3 days later, he stood aboard the orbital platform Varellin 6, a bulbous, rotating station anchored in the Lagrange corridor between Earth and Luna. The inspection team consisted of 4 Concord observers, 1 Andari, a Dravani technician, and on a surprising note a single Xolaran diplomat named Clash Tyr, who wore a ceremonial sash that fluttered despite the station's dead air. Zane kept his left arm in a low support sling, more for habit than necessity. The shoulder had stabilized, but the joint still clicked during sudden movements, and he didn't want to give Clash Tyr the satisfaction of seeing him flinch. Clash Tyr approached without formal greeting. "You are the one who smiled." Zane folded his good arm. "You must be the one who still thinks that matters. You made a gesture interpreted across 7 species as a threat." "I was being polite." Clash Tyr's pupils flicked like camera shutters. "Our long-range scans indicate multiple modular units have been repositioned since the last deployment." "That is not defensive behavior." Zane turned toward the viewport. Outside, Earth floated below, half shrouded in cloud, the Terminator line slicing across the Pacific. "You studied our deployments," he said. "Did you study our history? Your conflicts are well documented. Inconsistently. Then you missed the part where we learn to keep moving. Staying static is how we lose." Clash Tyr's tail coiled slightly, an involuntary signal of discomfort. "You evolve through pressure. But without it, you decay. That's one theory. The other is that we're just getting started." The Andari observer, hovering near the central console, emitted a low chime. "All sensor logs verified. No unauthorized weapon activations. No cloaked units detected." Clash Tyr hesitated. "Then I will submit a revised report." Zane didn't respond. He didn't need to. The Dravani technician approached him after the delegation dispersed. That was efficient. I'm not here to posture. No. You're here to be seen. Later that evening, Zane sat alone in the station's observation chamber, a circular room with transparent walls and nothing to distract from the view. Earth spun silently beneath him, a marble wrapped in storms and light. He rotated his shoulder carefully. No pain. Just a dull hum, like the memory of strain rather than the strain itself. A maintenance drone zipped past the window, trailing a stream of cable like a kite tail. He watched it disappear behind the curve of the station. The door opened behind him. Pelea entered, her glow subdued. You did not escalate. I didn't need to. Then you have learned. Zane turned slightly. Learned what? That your presence is stronger than your weapons. He didn't reply. Instead, he stood, walked to the far edge of the chamber, and let his hand rest against the cool surface of the glass. I didn't want to become a symbol, he said. You didn't. You became a pattern. He faced her. Meaning, you are not the only one who adapts, but you are the only one who does it with humor. He smiled. Pelea tilted her head. There. That gesture again. Still confusing? Only to those who fear what it means. Zane looked back at the stars. Let them be confused. When he returned to Earth, there were no parades. No speeches, just a quiet return to duty, a signed clearance from the medical board, and a ship waiting in orbit. He boarded without ceremony. The crew nodded as he passed. Nothing dramatic, just an acknowledgement. The stars outside didn't change, but the way they looked at Earth had. No threats, no apologies, just presence, just proof, and that was enough.